Just to pick up on what you were just saying about it working, at our last committee, one of the professors was saying that stop and search-like practices are minimally effective and would require a huge increase in volume to see a small decrease in targeted crimes. And other studies have found that the effect of stop and search on crime is marginal at best. So I just wondered if those are considered when you've looked at the tactic.
We've done some. I don't think the quality of the research out there on stop and search is that good. We've done some. We've got some fresh work which will be published soon, which shows, in the London context, the effect of stop and search on knife crime and violence is very significant, and that looks at 15 to 18 years data and shows us a very significant correlation in terms of more stop and search, less violence. So it absolutely works, and instinctively it ought to, hadn't it? In the sense of, if you're likely to end up being arrested if you carry a weapon, then you're less likely to carry a weapon. But there needs to be enough stop and search to bring that about. The other thing that persuades me it works, when the law got tougher on firearms around the turn of the century, when there was a lot of shootings in London, and that enabled different policing tactics and people to go into prison for a long time, people changed criminals changed their approach. They carry guns less often. It gives us different tactical options. And if you compare gun crime now to 20-odd years ago, there's no comparison. So enforcement can have an effect. And so I've got some very powerful data.
And then it'd be really interesting to see that study. And does it look at other interventions such as amnesties or the great work for the Violence Reduction Unit, which we've heard reduces people's risk to others by like 77% by being involved with a youth worker? So does the study take it kind of in the round of the other things that have happened in the last few years, like the Violence Reduction Unit and other things? So
they're different types of interventions, aren't they? I don't think they're comparable. So, of course, if we can do educational initiatives that reduce the number of kids who want to carry weapons, we stop them making bad life choices, that's great. But that's not going to... And if somebody wants to clear out some knives that a mother wants to clear out some knives that her teenage son who's now in prison has left in the house, then that's great as well. But people who are involved in crime, who are carrying weapons, are not going to give them in. They won't all engage with youth workers. So that's not saying we shouldn't try.
Yeah, I guess it's looking at in the round.
So of course we should have a balanced strategy, but I'm slightly concerned that your implication is that a balanced strategy, therefore, because you can do some other things, you don't need to do the enforcement stuff. I mean, if only that were true. But the enforcement
That's
has
not
to be
what I was
part of
saying. I was saying, did your study look at those other interventions? I'll look out for the data and we can maybe pick it up then.
I don't think I've ever seen a social science study that is able to rigorously look in the complexity of any city at different balances of different types of interventions and make an absolutely scientific judgment saying this is the right balance. We clearly need prevention, diversion, enforcement, and we have to make some judgments on the best mix of them. At the moment, I think the evidence is clear, as we'll bring it forward, that stop and search works. It's reduced by half. There are concerns about knife crime, and needs to be doing more of it, and communities support it, and so all of that comes together for me. I want us to be doing more of it, but picking up Emma's point, I've got to do work to build officers' confidence to do it, and I'm completely... So much as I was robust about officers are confident on sexual exploitation cases, and I haven't seen evidence on this, the confidence is much more fragile, and we've got to build that. And some of that's me, some of that's the IPC, some of that's the law, and that's what we're doing.
I guess it's interesting that we've been focusing on knife violence, which is, completely understandable. But most of the stops that take place, so 56%, are on the suspicion of drugs.
And so, on your previous questions, we talked, didn't we, about how our enforcement in the drugs market is linked to violence. So, so much of London's violence is linked to gangs, which is linked to drugs. So, the drug searches are often a part of that weapons reduction. So if you've got a gang who are selling drugs, some of the time they're carrying they're carrying weapons. So the officer's suspicion in that moment may be that this young man has got drugs, But in the back of his or her mind is actually, I've got suspicion they've got drugs, but they're part of gangs. Who knows what else they might have? So it is not. Academics like to pretend that drug searches are done for one purpose, and weapon searches are done for an entirely separate purpose. That's a theoretical, desk-based analysis. That's not the real world. When drugs and violence are so entwined, those searches are part of the same package of keeping our streets safe.
So in the majority of the drug searches, because obviously 70% of the stops don't result in anything, so...
They might result in somebody being reminded it's not a good idea to carry a weapon.
Okay. I just would test that anyone carrying drugs is carrying a knife as a theory. Just if you're stopping someone who's using street heroin or cannabis, or is that a theory? You know, or someone using MDMA on a night out. Like, is it a common assumption of all drugs that there's a knife?
That wasn't the point I made. The point I made was about drugs and gangs. That was the point I made, and that's where the link is very, very strong. Going back to sort of linking this to the child exploitation point, our county lines and city lines operations, we are, the last data I saw, so we, from the phone numbers that are running these lines, we identify the people and the location behind them, and we arrest them. They are men of violence. The people running these lines are men of violence, full stop, no ifs, no buts, no maybes. The last data I saw, more than 80% of them have got violence convictions and track records. 1 in 10 of them have been arrested for homicide. 1 in 6 of them are arrested for firearms offences. 1 in 3 of them are arrested for GBH. They are men of violence behind the lines, and they are coercing the kids who are running the drugs, and those kids are then graduating, and then we see these videos after a court case where you've got 2 15-year-olds doing gruesome things to each other with machetes. It's all tied together, and our job is to break that. And enforcement has a big role to play to break it, just as when we spot the 14-year-old before it's too late for him to change his life choices, we desperately need the help of charities and youth services to try and drag them back into better life choices and to help the family sort of rebalance. We need the combination of prevention and enforcement, but we should not pretend that there's some sort of theoretical separate drugs world over here and violence over here.
No, and that's not what I'm pretending at all. But just quickly on county lines, so the National Police Chiefs Council, so the NPCC, released data in November that's national, and I just wanted to test if this is the same picture in London. So they've said that external county lines have decreased by 12.2%, but internal county lines have increased by 232%. So I just wondered if that's similar for London.
We're doing a lot of operations, both in terms of external, as in, I know, drugs from the centre of London to Winchester, and internal, drugs from the centre of London to, I know, Kingston, picking the same train line. So we're doing operations of both those types. I don't know the exact ratio between them. The nature of the gangs in London mean, I think, in terms of county lines and disruptions in the country, I think we're doing north of 30% of them in the country, which is disproportionate, which shows it's a big factor here, which again goes to the significance of our work to disrupt those gangs.
But then they're obviously increasing, so obviously it's just testing if that's working as an approach.
We've got fewer teenagers being stabbed, we've got lower murder rate, so and this work is contributing towards that.
Thank you.